All right, so today we are going to be diving deep into The Art of Living by Epictetus. We've got the audiobook and the transcript all ready to go. I'm really excited to dig into this with you because, Epictetus's ideas have been around for thousands of years, but they still feel so relevant today.
Yeah, for sure. And what always strikes me about Epictetus is how he just starts with this really simple idea. Like figuring out what we can actually control versus what we can't.
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
It sounds so basic, but it's really like the foundation for everything else he talks about.
Yeah, and I think it's something we all struggle with, right? Like, how often do we get caught up worrying about things that are totally outside of our control? But how does that idea, like how does figuring out what we can and can't control, how does that actually lead to inner peace?
Well, okay, imagine you're trying to control the weather.
Okay.
Right? You're having this big outdoor event. You can plan, you can have backup options, but ultimately you can't force the sun to shine, right?
Right.
Epictetus would say that focusing on that uncontrollable element, it just leads to frustration and anxiety.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I guess, does that mean we just passively accept everything that happens to us? Where's the line between accepting what we can't control and actually taking action to change things?
It's a great question, and Epictetus acknowledges that line can be tricky. He's definitely not saying, become a doormat.
Right.
He's saying focus your energy on what you can influence.
Yeah.
Your own actions, your judgments, and ultimately your will.
Okay, so it sounds like we're not talking about, renouncing all our possessions and becoming hermits or something,
Yeah.
right? What does this look like in a practical sense?
It could involve some letting go, like maybe letting go of the need to control how other people perceive you, or releasing the desire for a specific outcome in a situation. And that's what gets interesting, because sometimes the path to freedom is about surrender, not control.
Okay. That's a perspective I hadn't considered before. It sounds like a lot of inner work, though. Epictetus also talks about questioning appearances. What exactly did he mean by that?
This is one of my favorite ideas from Epictetus. He uses this example of seeing a, quote, beautiful person. Our initial reaction might be admiration or even envy. But Epictetus would say, wait a minute, is that beauty actually inherent in the person, or are you projecting your own ideas onto them?
Oh, yeah. So it's like we get caught up in these snap judgments, these surface-level impressions, without really examining what's beneath them.
Exactly. And those unexamined judgments, they can lead us to all sorts of unnecessary suffering. Think about how often we get upset about things that are ultimately out of our control.
Yeah.
A traffic jam, a canceled flight, a rude comment on social media.
Oh, especially that.
Right. Epictetus would argue that it's not the event itself, but our reaction to it that determines our level of peace.
That's making me think about how easy it is to get triggered by things online. Like someone disagrees with our opinion, and suddenly we're caught in this spiral of anger and defensiveness.
And often that anger stems from a desire to control how others perceive us, which, as we discussed, is ultimately outside our control. Epictetus would probably encourage us to step back, question the appearance of the situation, and ask, is this something worth getting upset about?
Yeah. It sounds like he's advocating for a lot of self-awareness and emotional regulation. And this kind of connects to another key idea, how we manage our desires and aversions. What did he have to say about that?
Well, Epictetus saw desires and aversions as these demanding tyrants. They could just make us totally miserable. And he'd probably say our culture today, we're just obsessed with chasing desires, always wanting more, never truly satisfied.
Oh, 100%. It's like the second we get that new phone or achieve that promotion, we're on to the next thing we want. So if we're constantly chasing what we don't have, how do we ever find contentment?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Epictetus's answer might surprise you. He wouldn't tell us to stop wanting things altogether. He'd encourage us to, train our desires, to redirect them towards what's truly good and beneficial for us.
Okay, so instead of yearning for that fancy car or the perfect Instagram life, maybe we should be focusing on cultivating inner peace or stronger relationships or even contributing to something larger than ourselves.
You're getting it. It's about recognizing that lasting satisfaction doesn't come from acquiring things, but from aligning our desires with our values and living a life of purpose.
That makes a lot of sense. But then where does ambition fit into all of this? Does Epictetus want us to just sit around and accept the status quo?
That's where things get really nuanced. He wouldn't necessarily condemn ambition, but he'd want us to examine our motivations. Are we driven by a desire to prove ourselves to others or to gain recognition and status? Or are we pursuing something that genuinely aligns with our values and brings us a sense of meaning and purpose?
Oh, so it's like the difference between wanting to be seen as successful versus actually wanting to do meaningful work that makes a difference.
Exactly. And that distinction, it's crucial. Because if our ambition is driven by external validation, we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment. There will always be someone more successful, more accomplished, more whatever. But if our drive comes from a deeper sense of purpose, then we're free to pursue our goals without being attached to those specific outcomes.
Okay, so we've talked about controlling what we can, questioning appearances, managing our desires. But what about this idea of harmonizing with nature? How does that fit into the bigger picture?
This is one of the most beautiful and often misunderstood aspects of Stoic philosophy. It's not about literally living in the woods or rejecting all modern conveniences. It's more about recognizing that we're part of this larger interconnected web of life. And true peace comes from aligning ourselves with the natural order of things.
So it's not about like becoming one with nature in a literal sense. It's more about understanding our place in the grand scheme of things and acting in accordance with that understanding.
You got it. And for Epictetus, that meant accepting things as they are, not as we wish they'd be. It's about finding a sense of acceptance, even gratitude, for the challenges we face, knowing that they're part of a larger, meaningful process.
Okay, I can see how that shift in perspective could be really transformative. Instead of railing against every obstacle, we can choose to see it as an opportunity for growth or for learning, even for resilience. It's like we're choosing to dance with life even when the music isn't exactly what we expected.
I love that analogy. And that's really the essence of what Epictetus is teaching us. It's not about controlling every aspect of our lives. It's about learning to navigate the ups and downs with grace and wisdom and a sense of inner peace.
So it's not about avoiding the storms of life. It's about learning to weather them with more skill and composure.
Exactly. And that's where the real art of living comes in. It's about cultivating those inner strengths that allow us to not only survive, but to thrive, even amidst the inevitable challenges that life throws our way.
This is already making me rethink my whole approach to, well, pretty much everything. I'm eager to dig deeper into how Epictetus's ideas can help us navigate specific challenges, like relationships, work, and even our own mortality.
And that's exactly where we're headed next. So buckle up, because we're about to explore the practical applications of these powerful principles in the kind of messy, beautiful reality of our everyday lives.
All right, so we've kind of laid some groundwork with these like core ideas from Epictetus, but how do we actually apply this wisdom? Like, where do we even begin?
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Like when you first encounter these Stoic principles, you're like, okay, I need to control my reactions, question my judgments, manage my desires, and do you live in harmony with nature? Like, how is that even possible in the real world?
Right.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah.
But Epictetus wouldn't expect us to, like, master all this overnight. It's more about taking those, like, small, consistent steps. Focusing on one area at a time and gradually building those mental muscles.
So it's not about like achieving some perfect Stoic ideal overnight. It's more about making progress, like one step at a time.
Yeah, precisely. And those steps can be surprisingly simple. Like, for example, the next time you're like getting worked up about something, just try pausing for a moment and just ask yourself, like, is this within my control? Right?
That sounds like a great starting point.
Yeah.
It's like hitting the pause button on our automatic reactions and like choosing a more thoughtful response.
Exactly. And that pause, that moment of like conscious choice, that's where the power lies. That's where we can start to shift from being reactive to being proactive, from being ruled by our emotions to choosing our responses with like wisdom and intention.
Yeah, and I imagine that kind of intentional response, it gets easier with practice. Like anything else, the more we exercise those mental muscles, the stronger they become.
Absolutely. And that's where Epictetus's emphasis on self-reflection comes in. He believed that examining our thoughts and beliefs, understanding where they come from, and like identifying the ones that are causing us suffering, that was crucial to like growth.
So it's like we're doing a mental inventory, right? Taking stock of what's working, what's not, and making adjustments as needed.
Exactly. And, part of that inventory involves recognizing the influence of our like social circles. Like Epictetus believed that the company we keep, it has a profound impact on our thoughts, our behaviors, and ultimately our well-being.
So like if we're surrounded by negativity and drama, we're more likely to get sucked into that vortex.
Yeah.
But if we surround ourselves with people who are positive, supportive, growth-oriented,
Yeah.
then we're more likely to thrive.
Exactly. And that's why he encourages us to like choose our companions wisely. It's
Yeah.
not about cutting off everyone who's going through a rough patch or anything. It's more about being mindful of the energy we allow into our lives and like seeking out relationships that nourish our souls and support our growth.
It makes me think about how much time we spend, scrolling through social media, often just absorbing negativity without even realizing it. Maybe we need to be more intentional about curating our online experiences as well.
I think that's a brilliant application of this principle. We have way more control over our digital environments than we realize. Like, we can choose to follow accounts that inspire us, engage in conversations that uplift us, and just like limit our exposure to content that drains our energy or triggers, negative emotions.
It's just like we're creating this like mental and emotional filter, letting in the good stuff, blocking out the noise that doesn't serve us.
Exactly. And that filter becomes even more powerful when we cultivate that like stoic virtue of self-control, particularly when it comes to, things like pleasure and indulgence.
Okay, so does this mean we have to give up all our fun? Like become these super disciplined, joyless robots? Because I'm not sure I'm ready to give up my chocolate stash just yet.
No, I hear you. Epictetus wouldn't necessarily advocate for complete abstinence or deprivation or anything.
Okay.
It's more about, finding that balance between enjoying life's pleasures and just like staying mindful of how those pleasures impact our overall well-being.
So it's not about denying ourselves. It's about making conscious choices, choices that align with our values and goals.
Exactly. Think about it this way. Like, imagine you have this big goal you're working towards, maybe writing a book or training for a marathon.
Okay.
You might enjoy going out with friends, indulging in a delicious meal. But, if you do those things to excess, it could sabotage your progress towards your goal.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's about recognizing that our choices have consequences and that sometimes saying yes to one thing means saying no to something else. And that's where self-control comes in. It's about making those choices that support our long-term well-being, even if it requires some, short-term sacrifice.
You nailed it. It's about like aligning our actions with our values and making decisions that move us closer to like the kind of life we want to live. And this applies to all areas of life, including like our relationships.
Okay, so how do Epictetus's teachings apply to like something as complex and often messy as relationships?
Well, he reminds us that we can only control our own actions and reactions, not the behavior of others.
Right.
And, this is especially challenging in relationships because we often have all these expectations of how the other person should behave or how the relationship should unfold.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there. Like we build up these expectations in our minds, and then when a reality doesn't match our fantasy, we end up feeling, disappointed, frustrated, or even resentful.
And that's where Epictetus's teachings can be like incredibly liberating. He'd probably say like, let go of those rigid expectations and just focus on what you can control, your own kindness, compassion, and understanding.
So it's like we're choosing to approach the relationship with an open heart and a willingness to like accept the other person as they are, flaws and all.
Exactly. And that acceptance doesn't mean like condoning bad behavior or becoming a doormat.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we can't force someone to change, but we can choose how we respond to their actions.
So it's about setting healthy boundaries and taking care of our own emotional well-being, even when the other person isn't meeting our, expectations.
You're right on track. And this brings us to another crucial aspect of Epictetus's teachings. Dealing with difficult people. He acknowledges that we're going to encounter people who challenge us, frustrate us, even try to undermine us.
Oh, those folks are definitely out there. I've had my fair share of encounters with people who just seem to thrive on like negativity and conflict. How do we navigate those situations without like losing our own sense of peace?
Well, Epictetus would probably tell us to remember that like those difficult people are often suffering themselves, Like they might be driven by insecurity, fear, or unresolved pain. He encourages us to respond with compassion, even when it's hard.
So it's about seeing the person behind the behavior, recognizing that their actions are often a reflection of their own internal struggles, not like a personal attack on us.
Exactly. And that perspective shift, it can be so powerful. It allows us to like detach from the emotional drama and choose a more skillful response.
That's easier said than done, though. How do we actually cultivate that level of compassion? especially when we're feeling like hurt or angry.
Yeah, it takes practice. And Epictetus would be the first to admit that. It's not always easy. He'd probably encourage us to like reflect on our own imperfections, remember that we've all made mistakes, we've all hurt others in the past.
So it's about recognizing our shared humanity, right? Like, remember that we're all on this journey together, doing the best we can with the tools we have.
Beautifully said. And, that recognition can create a sense of like empathy and understanding that makes it easier to forgive, to let go of resentment, and to just choose a more compassionate response, even when it's really challenging.
Okay, so we've talked about applying these principles to our thoughts, our emotions, our social circles, our relationships. But what about something as big and unavoidable as, like, our own mortality? Like, how does Epictetus's philosophy help us face the reality of death?
This is where Epictetus's teachings become like truly profound. He reminds us that death is a natural part of life. It's a universal experience that we will all face eventually. And he wouldn't want us to like dwell on death with fear or anxiety, but to accept it as an inevitable part of, the human journey.
That's a lot easier said than done, though. I mean, death is pretty much the ultimate unknown, and it's totally natural to have fears and anxieties about, what might happen after we die. So how do we reconcile those fears with this idea of acceptance?
I think Epictetus would probably encourage us to like shift our focus from the fear of death to the appreciation of life.
Okay.
He reminds us that we have this like limited amount of time on this earth and that each day is a precious gift.
So instead of worrying about how much time we have left, we should just focus on making the most of the time we have right now.
Exactly. He'd probably say, don't waste your precious energy worrying about something you can't control. Focus on living each day to the fullest, pursuing your passions, cultivating those meaningful relationships, and contributing to the world in a way that feels meaningful to you.
That's a powerful message. It's about shifting our perspective from fear and scarcity to, like, gratitude and abundance, from dwelling on what we might lose to appreciating what we already have.
You got it. And that shift in perspective, it can be so liberating. It allows us to like approach life with more joy, more intention, and a deeper sense of appreciation for every moment.
This conversation has already been so insightful, but I'm curious to explore how these principles can be applied to, specific challenges like work, success, and even our relationship with material possessions.
And that's exactly where we're headed next. So grab your metaphorical toolbox because we're about to dive deep into that practical wisdom that can help us navigate the complexities of modern life with like more grace, more resilience, and ultimately more inner peace.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground already, like questioning appearances, harmonizing with nature. But I'm curious how Epictetus's ideas, how they can help us navigate something as central to our lives as work. Most of us spend a huge chunk of our time working. So how do we bring this Stoic mindset into that?
This is where his ideas about purpose and duty, I think they really come into play. He believed that every role we inhabit comes with certain responsibilities. And, fulfilling those with excellence, that's a key part of living a meaningful life.
So it's not just about, clocking in and out, collecting a paycheck. He's saying there's something like more to it, a sense of purpose we can find in our work.
Exactly. Like seeing your work, whatever it is, as this opportunity to contribute to something larger than yourself, using your unique talents and skills to make a positive impact.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really refreshing perspective. I think a lot of people struggle with feeling, unfulfilled or even burnt out in their jobs. So how do we tap into that sense of purpose when we're feeling stuck or disillusioned?
I think he'd probably encourage us to reflect on our motivations. Like, why did we choose this particular line of work? What are the values that kind of underpin our work ethic? And, maybe most importantly, how can we align our daily tasks with those deeper values and motivations?
So it's like we're bridging that gap between what we do and why we do it. Finding that sense of meaning that can fuel our efforts, even when the tasks themselves maybe aren't that glamorous.
You got it. And that alignment, it's crucial because that's what allows us to find satisfaction and fulfillment, even in the face of those challenges. Setbacks.
Which, let's be real, those are pretty much inevitable in any job. So how do we apply these principles when we're dealing with, those work stressors, the deadlines, the difficult colleagues, the demanding bosses, all that?
Yeah, this is where his teachings about control and acceptance become so valuable. He'd remind us we can't control the actions of others, the whims of the market, or the unpredictable nature of pretty much everything.
Right, so it's not about trying to like micromanage every situation or force a specific outcome. It's more about recognizing what we can influence, our own effort, our attitude, our approach, and just like letting go of the rest.
Exactly. And that letting go, it can be so freeing because when we stop clinging to the need to control everything, it just creates space for things to unfold in their own way. And we free ourselves from that, constant state of stress and anxiety.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it sounds like it requires a lot of trust. Trust in ourselves, trust in the process, maybe even trust in something like larger than ourselves.
You're hitting on something really important. Like Epictetus believed that trusting in the natural order of things, recognizing that there's a wisdom that's bigger than our own limited understanding, that was a key to finding peace.
So it's like we're surrendering to the flow of life, like accepting that we don't have all the answers and trusting that things will ultimately unfold as they should.
Beautifully said. And that surrender doesn't mean, becoming passive or giving up on our goals. It's about recognizing that sometimes the path to success, it's not linear or predictable.
So it's not about forcing our will upon the world. It's about working with the forces that are already at play.
Exactly. And that harmony, that's what allows us to navigate those challenges with more grace and more resilience. It's about recognizing that setbacks, they're not failures. They're opportunities for learning and growth.
This is making me rethink like my whole definition of success. It's not just about achieving those external markers like promotion, salary increases, fancy job titles. It's more about finding that internal sense of satisfaction and fulfillment that comes from, aligning our actions with our values and living a life of purpose.
You're right on track. And that brings us to, another crucial aspect of Epictetus' teachings, his perspective on material possessions.
Okay, this is where I'm really intrigued because we live in a culture that's so obsessed with acquiring like more stuff, always chasing the next shiny object. So how do we reconcile this kind of like consumerist mindset with Epictetus' philosophy?
Well, he'd probably start by reminding us that true happiness, it doesn't come from external things. He believed that attaching our sense of worth or well-being to those, material possessions was a recipe for suffering.
Because they're ultimately impermanent. Right. We can lose them. They can break. They can go out of style. And if our happiness is like dependent on those external factors, then we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment.
Exactly. Epictetus would encourage us to find contentment in the present moment, appreciate what we already have, and detach from that, constant need for more.
So it's like we're shifting our focus from what we lack to what we already possess, from a mindset of scarcity to a mindset of abundance.
You're getting it. And that shift in perspective, it can be so freeing because when we release that grip on material possessions, it just creates space for something far more valuable, inner peace.
Wow. This has been such an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've gained a whole new set of tools for, navigating not just the challenges, but also the joys and opportunities of life.
And remember, those tools, they're always available to you. It's just a matter of, practicing, incorporating them into your daily routines and making them a part of who you are.
It's like we're building this mental and emotional fortress, one brick at a time. That can help us withstand, the storms of life with more grace and more resilience.
And the beauty of it is that fortress, it's built from within. It's not something we acquire, it's something we cultivate. Through our choices, our actions, and our commitment to living in accordance with these, timeless principles.
Well, I think it's safe to say that Epictetus has definitely earned a permanent spot on my bookshelf. This deep dive has left me feeling so inspired and empowered and ready to just embrace the art of living, one mindful moment at a time.
And as you go out into the world, I want to leave you with one final thought from Epictetus to ponder. The key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best.
That's such a powerful reminder to be mindful of the company we keep, both online and offline, and to surround ourselves with people who inspire us to be our best selves. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the wisdom of Epictetus. Remember, these teachings, they're not just to be heard, they're to be lived. So go out there, experiment with these ideas, and discover the transformative power of, Stoic philosophy in your own life.
Until next time, keep seeking knowledge, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.